In this video, we'll dive into some harmonic patterns we'll call cadences. Now, the word cadence has various meanings in different contexts. It might refer, for example, to patterns or inflections of speech, certain kinds of pacing, or dance rhythms. In music theory lingo, we'll use the term cadence to refer to the chord patterns or groupings that are frequently used at the ends of musical phrases. The cadences we commonly recognize are authentic cadences, which include both imperfect and perfect authentic cadences, half cadences, plagal cadences, and deceptive cadences. Among these cadences, the authentic cadence is the one we might most easily identify because it's been present in most of the progressions we've looked at so far. An authentic cadence occurs in any phrase that ends the way we've talked about phrases usually ending, with a dominant chord followed by a tonic chord, so 5-1 or 7-1. Now, it's important to understand that there are two subcategories of authentic cadences, the perfect authentic cadence and the imperfect authentic cadence. To understand the difference, it might be easiest to look at all of the conditions that have to be met in order for a perfect authentic cadence to be present. Any authentic cadence that doesn't check each of these boxes is automatically an imperfect authentic cadence as long as it has some form of dominant chord resolving to some tonic chord. The requirements for a perfect authentic cadence are as follows. First, the dominant function must be represented by a 5 chord, whether that's as a triad or as a 5-7 chord. Because a 5 or 5-7 chord is one of the criteria for a perfect authentic cadence, an authentic cadence that uses a diminished 7 chord as the dominant would automatically be an imperfect authentic cadence. The next requirement is that both the 5 and 1 chords must appear in root position. If either chord is inverted, the cadence is imperfect. Finally, a perfect authentic cadence requires that in the final 1 chord, the highest voice in the texture sounds the tonic pitch, or the do. Since the chord would have to be in root position, that means that this root would be doubled in the highest and lowest voices. In 4-part texture, of course, that would be the soprano and the bass. If the soprano sounds the 3rd or the 5th of the 1 chord, yep, that makes it an imperfect authentic cadence. Some textbooks like to go to great lengths to formally distinguish among and label the various kinds of imperfect authentic cadences based on the way in which they differ from a perfect authentic cadence. However, for our purposes, it will be plenty sufficient to simply label IAC for any authentic cadence that doesn't meet all of the requirements of a perfect authentic cadence, or PAC. Again, all authentic cadences end with a dominant chord followed by a tonic chord. For a perfect authentic cadence, each of the following must also be true. The progression must be 5-1 or 5-7-1. Both of the chords must appear in root position, and the first scale degree must appear in both the highest and lowest voices of the 1 chord. Because authentic cadences reflect the conclusion of harmonic function as we've discussed so far, those are considered the most final sounding. Therefore, they'll usually be the kinds of cadences we find at the very end of a piece. However, full pieces of music typically contain quite a number of phrases, and the other kinds of cadences can appear in earlier phrases. One of the common types of cadences that is not an authentic cadence is the half cadence. A half cadence happens when the phrase ends on a 5 chord. That's it, that's the only requirement. Of course, as we've learned, the 5 chord is pretty unstable, so the half cadence tends to feel a lot like a cliffhanger. We expect more to come. So a phrase ending in a half cadence is often followed by another phrase that ends in a more conclusive cadence, like an authentic cadence. In minor keys, we have the possibility of a particular type of half cadence called a Phrygian cadence. Like other half cadences, Phrygian cadences end with a 5 chord. The distinction is that the 5 is preceded by a first inversion 4 chord. Now the 4 really would need to be in first inversion for such a cadence to qualify as Phrygian. That inversion allows the bass to move down just a half step from the 4/6 chord into the 5 chord. That half step motion in the bass is really the signature characteristic of a Phrygian cadence. In a plagal cadence, the final chords are 4/1 instead of 5/1 as in authentic cadences. The plagal is sometimes nicknamed the Amen cadence in reference to its frequent use at the end of hymns in Christian churches. Finally, the deceptive cadence. This type of cadence gets its name from the sort of plot twist in which we arrive at a 5 chord with the expectation of resolving to 1, but instead the resolution is to 6. So why the 6 chord? Well, as I briefly mentioned in another video, the 6 chord is occasionally used as a tonic substitution. This sort of works because the tonic triads share 2 of its 3 pitches in common with 6 chords, the tonic pitch itself, do, as well as the 3rd scale degree, mi or me. The root of the 6 chord is the only difference, and as a matter of convenience, that root is only a step away from the root of the 5 chord, making it easy for the bass to achieve its deceptive trickery. Now, there are some special voice leading considerations that come into play when we're writing deceptive cadences, particularly when we're writing them in minor keys, but we'll cover those separately.